Sound check. Test 1, 2, 3.
Good evening. My name is Steve Goldstein, longtime Arizona journalist, and I'll be the moderator for this evening's debate. The Citizen Clean Elections Commission is the sponsor of this event. As the state's voter education agency, Clean Elections is the official sponsor of Arizona debates, so voters have the opportunity to hear directly from the candidates, ask questions on the issues that matter most to them, and vote informed. For those of you who are watching this debate live, you can submit a question at any time in one of three ways. Either email us at debates@kc-a.com. That's debates@kc-a.com. You can also text in a question at 480-302-1810 or call us at 480-937-1253. We may not get to all of the audience questions, but we will do our best. Tonight, we'll be hearing from candidates in Legislative District 5, which covers parts of Maricopa County. As this is a primary election debate, candidates are competing against others in the party to become the official party nominees. All registered voters, including independent voters, can vote in the primary. Independent voters can choose a single party ballot if they wish to vote in the primary. Our debate this evening features the Democratic House candidates who will debate their opponents for approximately 60 minutes. The candidates debating will appear with their cameras and microphones on. And now for the three candidates. Each of you will have a minute for an opening and a closing statement, and 1 to 2 minutes for your responses to voter questions. We're encouraging an open exchange of dialogue amongst all of you. If you feel the need to respond to another candidate's comments after they conclude speaking, that is okay to do so. I may limit responses for time management purposes, and again, we'll remind the candidates and the audience our aim is for a respectful, courteous, and professional environment. The goal tonight is to connect candidates and voters so our electorate may vote informed. In the State House, voters get to vote for two candidates, and the candidates we'll hear from this evening are all Democrats: Sarah Ligori, Charles Lucking, Aaron Marquez. Also, Dory Theiden was invited to participate but declined. And now we will bring in our Democratic House candidates officially, and the order in which the candidates will speak is determined by alphabetical order by last name, starting for opening comments. Closing comments will go in that same order to give the person who went third a chance to officially close our debate. And now we will start with Sarah Ligori. Ms. Ligori, please start with your opening statement.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. First of all, I want to give a big thanks to Clean Elections for the time-honored tradition of hosting these debates, and to Mr. Goldstein. I am a longtime fan, and everyone for taking the time to tune in and hear from us, along with my peers, Mr. Lucking and Mr. Marquez. My name is Sarah Ligori. I am from Tucson, but I'm very grateful to live in and represent the wonderful LD5 district, which I have called home for the past 17 years. I am lucky to have three of the most rewarding and sometimes hardest jobs, being a legislator, overseeing housing and homelessness initiatives at a statewide nonprofit, and being the mother of two boys. There are a few reoccurring themes that run through these three jobs for me: the ability to listen, be patient with progress, and to be kind. I got involved in local politics out of a passion to support people and to help defend against extremism in this state. I never thought that the work would lead to being a state representative, but it was in this work that I found my calling and my tribe. I have successfully navigated water conservation policy and have had an acute focus for the past 3 years to raise awareness for our housing affordability crisis. I hope to continue with the legislative work I began in 2002 as I seek to represent LD5 for another term, and I look forward to digging deeper into my policy priorities in this conversation tonight.
Thank you. Charles Lucking, your opening statement, please.
Thank you so much, and thank you for everyone who's tuned in tonight. Good evening, Arizona. My name is Charles Lucking, and it is my honor and my privilege to serve the great Legislative District 5 as your representative in the State House. I'm running for re-election as an Arizonan who cares deeply about our state and the diverse and beautiful communities that make up LD5. I'm a fifth-generation Arizonan. I'm a husband and a father of two, a returned Peace Corps volunteer, a public interest attorney, and a servant leader. As your neighbor in the legislature, I serve on the Military Affairs and Public Safety Committee and the Commerce Committee. In committee and on the floor, I fight for our shared values. Together, we push to protect public education. We demand access to reproductive rights and stand with our LGBTQ community, our workers, our veterans, and our most vulnerable populations. We work tirelessly to increase affordable housing, preserve our natural resources, and safeguard our voting rights. With your support and your vote, we can continue to build a sustainable, healthy, and thriving Arizona.
Thank you. And now, Mr. Aaron Marquez, your opening statement, please.
Yeah, thank you so much. Excited to be here tonight. First, want to start by thanking Representative Liguori and Lucking for your sacrifice this legislative session. We're lucky that the two of you, are filling the appointments for Representatives Longden and Shaw. We have big shoes to fill here in District 5. For the rest of you that are listening, if you don't know me already, my name is Aaron Marquez, and I've been fighting for a democratic Arizona for the past 20 years. I started in politics as a 21-year-old field organizer for John Kerry in 2004. And today, 20 years later, I'm 41 years old. I'm a girl dad, and I'm lucky to serve as an elected governing board member on the Phoenix Union High School District, where I serve alongside Senator Leila Halston. And so for most of you, I am your current at-large school board member for the Phoenix Union High School District. In between, the past 15 years, I've spent in the Army Reserve. I've deployed twice to Afghanistan, and when not overseas defending our country, I've spent every election cycle working to elect Democratic candidates here in Arizona. I've worked for Terry Goddard, I've worked for Ruben Gallego, and currently I serve as the chair of the Veterans Advisory Councils for Senator Mark Kelly and Attorney General Chris Mays. On the Phoenix Union Board, I succeeded in fighting for a $15 minimum wage for our lowest paid employees in the school district and a pay raise for all of our teachers and education support professionals. I was also part of hiring the first woman to lead our school district in the over 129 years that Phoenix Union has been in existence. So we're super proud to have Thea Andrade leading Phoenix Union today. As your state representative, I will fight back against MAGA Republicans and their attacks on abortion rights and fight for the abortion rights ballot initiative in November. I will bring my governing board experience to the legislature to fight alongside Governor Hobbs to roll back the private school vouchers put in place under Governor Ducey. I'll pick up Representative Longden's efforts on gun safety. I was proud in this last election cycle to be endorsed by Everytown for gun safety, and I currently serve on their Veterans Advisory Council nationally to prevent gun safety across the country, or to fight for gun safety across the country. And like Representative Shaw, I will also look for opportunities to reach across the aisle. More than anything, in this election, between now and November, I will fight to get Governor Hobbs a Democratic majority. In LD5, I'll fight to increase Democratic turnout, especially Latino turnout, where 36% of our district is represented by members of our Latino community. And together, we'll fight to defeat Donald Trump, turn out the vote, keep him out of the White House, and send Ruben Gallego to the U.S. Senate and defeat Carrie Lake. I hope I can count on your vote. Look forward to discussing the issues with my fellow candidates here tonight.
Thanks to all of you for those opening statements. Now we get to the questions. For this particular question, Ms. Liguori, I'll start with you. And for each subsequent question, I will start, for example, next with Mr. Lucking and finally with Mr. Marquez. So each of us has a chance to go first. Earlier this week, we know that Governor Hobbs signed the repeal of the abortion ban that was written in 1864, but there is still some uncertainty about whether that ban will be in effect at any point, as the repeal may not go into effect until 90 days after the current legislative session. So, Ms. Liguori, what, if anything, would you like to see done to clarify the situation? Would you be in favor, if it were possible, for example, of a special session?
Thank you, Steve. It's been a tumultuous month, I would say. And the culmination of that was little victory we wanted to celebrate this week with the governor signing the repeal. It was not an easy feat to bring it to her desk. And so I was very glad to see the women in my Democratic caucus specifically able to use the rules and strategy in order to get it there. I say that it's a small victory, though, because of the timing you just mentioned. We do have it as the law of the land, as it doesn't go into effect until 90 days after session ends. So there still is a lot of concern. There still is a lot of potential harm, not just to pregnant people, but also to providers that are giving care. I was talking to an OB yesterday that said people in her clinic are deciding to shut down the clinic or they're moving out of state already. So this is only, a month and a half since this has been in effect, and the future is unpredictable as to when we might be able to get a full repeal. I think that all of us are looking at the abortion access initiative to enshrine it in our Constitution, as 6 other states in the country have done, as the best permanent way to get government out of women in reproductive health care, and so that women can make the best decisions of their lives in pregnancy. I was in the legislature when the 15-week abortion ban came through. And the 2 things that were very clear then were, one, that this was a very intentional plan that Republicans in the majority had pushed forward. We also know in their comments this week that it was their intent to have this full territorial ban be the law of the land in our state. They want abortion to be illegal for all Arizonans, which goes directly against what the majority of Arizonans want. So right now, while we have that victory of the repeal is signed by the governor, the timing is still unknown. As to a special session, I would leave that up to the governor to decide what's in the best interest there. I have also heard that the majority might keep us there as long as possible, so that repeal cannot be repealed for, until after November. There's a number of unknown things on the table right now. We've got when the initiatives might be run counter to the abortion access initiative. But what we need to focus on right now is there's women that are turning up in hospitals. There's people that are pregnant that are being turned away from care. There are providers that are not sure what the future might hold. And so on a day-to-day basis, there is real harm and real medical harm coming. And that's what we need to continue to focus on and to fight for.
Thank you. Mr. Lucking, a minute or so for a response on that.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think we all felt the weight of history, as well as the expectations and needs of millions of Arizonans as Governor Hobbs signed that bill to repeal the territorial ban. It was a relic that scores of legislatures before us failed to eliminate. And historically, we've seen ongoing attacks on reproductive rights for decades. The right to a safe and legal abortion is critical to an individual's personal autonomy. It's also a critical part of healthcare for all people who are able to become pregnant. And to be clear, these are rights that impact not just women, but a really broad spectrum of people, including those in the LGBTQ community. Access to abortion is a healthcare issue. It's an equity issue. It's an issue of freedom of self-determination. And there will continue to be attacks on abortion rights until we get these codified in our Constitution. That's why it's imperative that we continue to push the abortion access initiative. That's why I'm carrying it with me as I'm knocking doors. And we just need to keep pushing until we get it on the ballot and get it passed.
Thank you. Mr. Marquez.
Yeah, I agree with both Representative Liguori and Lucking. We're grateful to have them down at the legislature, fighting to get this repealed. But as you pointed out, this repeal passed without an emergency clause. So we're looking at 90 days whenever they finish the legislative session before the repeal goes into place. And I would just add that the same, anti-abortion extremists that celebrated the 1864 ban are the same ones that crafted the 15-week ban and have already laid the groundwork for confusing ballot initiatives to make it hard to pass the abortion rights ballot initiative in November. So just like Representative Lucking, I am as well carrying the abortion rights ballot initiative petitions every day when I'm out knocking on doors, talking to voters. As a candidate, I send a lot of fundraising emails and I have sent a fundraising email for the abortion rights ballot initiative, and I've already helped raise money for the abortion rights ballot initiative. And I think that's really the only way we can guarantee access to abortion in Arizona is to take politicians out of it and pass the abortion rights ballot initiative in November. But as I say that, I would also, put out the warning that our state Supreme Court has been stacked by the previous Republican governor, and they have a history of tossing ballot initiatives at the last minute. So really, the most important thing outside of passing the initiative in November is making sure we flip the state legislature so that we can truly protect abortion rights regardless of what happens in November.
Okay, thank you all for that. Mr. Lucking, I'm going to follow up with another abortion-related question. And Ms. Liguori referenced, and then you all mentioned a little bit as well, this proposed ballot measure, reproductive rights measure. If in fact this gets on the ballot in November, would you be in support, first of all? But in addition to that, in the position of a lawmaker, would you have liked to see an action taken by elected leaders that is even, we can escape the special session question I asked, let me make it even broader than that. whatever the numbers are at the legislature, whether it's 31, 29, 16, 14, or another balance of it, would you like to see elected leaders take the lead on this as opposed to a ballot measure having to take the lead, as some voters might imply?
Actually, you know what? I'm really in favor of it being on the ballot. I think we need to make the change to the Constitution. When a person who is pregnant has a conversation with their medical provider about pregnancy and health, I believe a legislator should never be sitting at the table with them. And the winds of politics shift one direction and another. And you know, in the future, one party is going to be in power, another is going to be in power. And if these laws keep changing back and forth, people will not be able to adequately, you know, plan for their reproductive health. So, you know, yes, I am in favor of this ballot measure. I think that, you know, protecting it in our Constitution is the only way that Arizonans can be secure that they own their choices when it comes to reproductive rights and their bodily autonomy.
Okay. Mr. Marquez, do you think there should be something else done by elected leaders, or are you in favor of the proposed initiative? Should it make the ballot? As Mr. Lucky mentioned, that will be in the Constitution, so it can't get any better than that. But would you like to see elected leaders taking the lead on it instead of being put to the voters?
I would say I'm all for the abortion rights ballot initiative. I think a constitutional amendment is absolutely needed. Passing a constitutional amendment through the legislature instead of the citizens initiative, I think we'll, you know, with the current balance of power in the legislature, 29 to 31 and 16 to 14, we're fighting hard to flip, you know, 2 seats, maybe more, 3 seats, but to have a Democratic supermajority in the legislature to do it through legislative action for a constitutional amendment would seem outside of the realm of possibility at this point. So I think between now and November, any Democratic candidate, especially a Democratic candidate, you know, representing District 5, which is Democratic majority area, I believe it's up to us, you know, between now and July 30th, before our primary, and then after our primary through November, to do everything we can to get out the vote for the abortion rights ballot initiative. And then I'll add, you know, next legislative session, you know, if we flip the legislature and fight for a Democratic majority in the chambers, you know, we got to continue to, you know, provide other protections for abortion rights, but also contraception. There's, I know this legislative session, there's been some attempts to make it more difficult for contraception access here in Arizona by the MAGA Republicans down there at the legislature.
And Ms. Liguori, the reason I phrased the question the way I did is because there have been times, and perhaps this is an example, or perhaps it is not, where criticism from voters generally has been, well, why do those lawmakers always kick the can down the road and we end up with a voter ballot measure? We have to have this grassroots thing. That's the origin of the question. But let me ask you, is there something you'd like to see, regardless of whether you're a supporter of the measure, which clearly you are, is there something more to it, or is this the best way to do it? Legislative leaders are doing, or legislative representatives and senators are doing as much as they can, and then voters will have a chance to approve the measure in all likelihood if it gets on the ballot.
Thanks, Stephen. I mean, I do agree with everything that Mr. Lucking and Mr. Marquez said. I want to zoom out like even farther though, because I think that the past 2 weeks, when we've heard from the Republican majority explaining their votes on why they were not in favor of repealing the territorial ban, it made it very clear how deeply rooted extreme ideology and extreme religion has leaked into and overtaken what we in this country have known to be as rights and freedoms for people. So for us to be arguing whether 51% of the population is able to make private and personal healthcare decisions, I think is anti-American and is anti what the conservative Republicans have always stood for. So I think that's at the very root of this all that I don't want to get lost, is we have valued our freedom in this country, and right now we're trying to strip a majority of the population around one of the most sensitive and health compromised things that you can go through, which is pregnancy. And when the 15-week abortion ban came through the legislature, I spoke about that of pregnancy is unpredictable from start to finish. You don't even know if you're able to get pregnant, let alone if it's going to be a smooth pregnancy, let alone what the outcome of that child or baby is going to be. So I think that from a health and science perspective, legislators and government do not need to be involved in this. And I'm sad that our country is going down this, but I think it also shows that it's a bipartisan measure with a lot of the ballot initiatives that have passed in places like Kansas and Ohio and California. And I do hope that Arizona is next, because I do think it is the way that we protect long-term safety and care for people that are living in this state that are pregnant or wanting to become pregnant.
If I could just like touch on what Rep. Ligori said for just a moment, and it'll be really brief.
Mr. Marquez, you'll have a chance too if you'd like a few more seconds. Go ahead, Mr. Lucking. Yes.
Yeah, so I anticipate even when this ballot initiative passes and we have this protected in our Constitution, there will continue to be attacks on reproductive rights that happen in the legislature. It's very clear, like Representative Ligori said, that the people who are coming at this from such an extreme place are not going to let this rest, and they're going to continue to attempt to chip away at these rights. And so no matter what happens with the balance of power next year, I think it's going to be incumbent upon Democrats to continue to protect, what will be our constitutional rights.
Mr. Marquez, would you like 30 seconds on that? You're muted, sir.
Come off mute. They told us to go on mute. I'll just say, I was in Afghanistan the night that Donald Trump was elected in 2016, and I saw our rules of engagement change. I saw our democracy come under a lot of threats, and I would pin this problem on Donald Trump. In one presidential term in the White House, he completely changed the dynamic of the courts to create the conditions for what is happening here today in Arizona. And so I don't think it's an overstatement to say that this election between now and November is about the future of our democracy and about the future of our basic human rights and healthcare, and abortion is healthcare. And I think it's so important that we pass this ballot initiative. And I would say it's not an overstatement to say that we do not have a legitimate conservative party in this country right now. And the types of things that this conservative party is doing, I would compare to the same efforts that the Taliban made in Afghanistan to restrict rights for women and girls in that country. And it's completely un-American.
Okay. We are going to stick with you as we completely change topics. As a lawmaker, as a legislator, we're always told that the only job you actually have is to complete a budget before July 1st. So we are looking at budget deficits. We don't know how long those are going to last. Sometimes those lead to really rough cuts. We've seen that in the past when the state has gone through and the country's gone through deep recessions. As you're looking at budget deficit now, if you were in the legislature, are there things, could you give me one thing that you would absolutely, without question, vote to protect, and something else you would be willing to cut?
Well, I'll say, as a governing board member for the Phoenix Union High School District, we also have to pass a budget. So at our next governing board meeting, June 1st, we'll be doing a public hearing, and then June 15th, we'll be passing a budget. And so much of our budget as a school district is certainly, dependent on the state legislators passing a budget and that coming down to the school districts. Something that I think is absolutely draining our budget and is these private school vouchers. I think reports show $750 million are coming out of public schools in Arizona. In Phoenix Union alone, I can't say there's 100% attribution, but we've lost 1,000 students in the one school year that these private school vouchers have been in place. So that is something, as we look at future budgets, how do we chip away at repealing that so it's not draining money from our public school districts? So absolutely, the thing I would protect at all costs is continued investment in our public school districts in Arizona. And then in terms of cuts, I don't necessarily think that's a debate we should have here in District 5. I think the focus really between now and November is flipping the state legislature and figuring out how do we actually make investments that reflect the values of our community And I don't think we should be afraid about looking at ways to raise revenue as a state as well.
Thank you. Ms. Liguori, as a lawmaker, and if you were to be retained, when it comes to the budget, what is something that would be non-negotiable for you, but another way to either raise revenues or make a cut? What would your priority be in that category as well? So one of each, please.
Yeah, I appreciate that conversation because it's very timely and it's looming. And as a financial advisor for many years, I'm very familiar with budgets and kind of taking a look at them to see where we can cut. I think I, echo what Mr. Marquez said, and then tack on a couple things to where we need to trim back and understand that we didn't get to this budget shortfall by accident. Between the ESAs, between the flat tax, even between the sober living homes, the price tag for what we're paying in cleaning up the atrocities that have happened there. We're looking at potentially $4 billion in climbing that our state is having to pay out. So I think that I like to tie that back to, we need to be smarter when making policy. We need to understand not just consequences to policy, but financial consequences to policy. Unfortunately, the majority party, I've watched them operate in a way where consequences don't seem to be at the forefront of how they legislate and how they're governing. And it keeps leading us to this economic hole that we're now experiencing. That I'd also add comes at a very sensitive time with all of the ARPA and federal dollars from COVID going away, and at a time when our city's budgets are having a pullback from the rental tax cuts. So finances in our state, I think, are very precarious, and we're going to have to take a hard look and protect what we can protect the most. I know probably we share all the same priorities on this call of protecting childcare, protecting healthcare, making sure that we have money for the housing trust fund. But I think where we're going to have to take long, hard looks at next year, especially if we flip the legislature, is how do we find new pools of money from ineffectual streams right now so that we can divert them to cover these shortfalls and to replenish these areas that we care about greatly, such as education and childcare and housing. I think that as budget talks continue, what we've heard is there might just be a flat 4% across all agencies. That's going to have to be, I wouldn't call, it's a haircut, but it's going to affect a lot of programs and a lot of people. So taking a deeper look into what that means, on a department by department basis is what we're looking at right now. But my thought is to, where do we find additional streams of revenue to make sure that we're supporting these programs that we want to support moving forward?
Okay. And Mr. Lucking, wrap us up on this particular question. I will give each of you about 30 seconds if you have anything else on this particular topic before we move on, but go ahead, please.
Yeah, I don't have too much to add. The reason I initially got interested in politics was because of public education. It's been 2 decades now that our public education system has been chipped away, and just in the last couple of years, the ESA debacle that the JLBC estimated it was going to be $60 to $80 million, turns out to be 10 times that amount, has sunk us into such a hole. And also the irresponsibility with which our budget was treated last year, and coming in late in this session, hearing about legislators being told they had just like a bucket of money that they could choose how they wanted to spend it on. There has been a tradition of mismanagement of money in our state, and incorrect priorities and wrong priorities. And so, there are no good options right now for who gets the cuts. But if I'm going to draw a hard line in the sand, that hard line is going to be public education, and I'm going to fight like hell to keep as much money in our public education system as possible, because it has just been carved to the quick. And so that for me is top priority. Apart from that, our social safety net is also incredibly stressed right now, with our housing issues, with healthcare issues, and like I said, there's no good options here for cutting. But but there are some areas that I think we need to really draw a hard line and say, we cannot accept more cuts.
Mr. Marquez, as I started with you, I'm happy to give you another 30 seconds or so on this.
Yeah, the only thought that came to mind when thinking about cuts was for-profit private prisons, and finding ways to decrease our dependence on them here in Arizona. But that would probably come with an investment in recidivism programs in our other prisons. So, but if I had to cut one thing, I'd start there.
Thank you very much. And Ms. LaGuerre, before I go to you, I want to remind folks that are watching this debate live, you could submit a question at any time by emailing us at debates@kc-a.com. That's debates@kc-a.com. You can also text us at 480-302-1810 or call us at 480-937-1253. I'm not sure it feels this way to the candidates, but we are flying through this. We're already halfway through. It's already about 30 minutes in, only about 30 minutes left. So try to get to as many topics as we can. So Ms. LaGuerre, this one actually comes from one of our viewers, and it fits well with what we just talked about with public schools. Unregulated vouchers, according to this particular writer, have gutted our district school budgets, including Paradise Valley USD, which has had to close 3 schools due to budget shortfalls. What are your plans to support local school boards in your district to fight back against the free fall spend, again, in this person's words, of ESA vouchers?
Great question. And that is never far from any of our minds when we're down at the Capitol or when I'm even just talking to constituents. My kids go to the Madison School District, and public education was actually one of the first things that I started carrying petitions for many years ago to make sure that we're funding and not cutting and supporting. And up until, the day that we had to turn in petitions, I was collecting with a couple other moms outside of my son's school. I think that it's very obvious the financial pitfall we're in when we're the only state in the country that has allowed vouchers to universally expand. Again, this was something that happened when I was in the legislature and was very vocal about, not just about the hardship that was going to happen to our communities and our school districts, the teachers and the students, but just the fact that, again, there's really no oversight into exactly what we're doing when we put no guardrails and no constraints and no pragmatic approaches to it. And I think that that's evident, and we're the only state that has done this, and we're the only state bearing the cost. And you could look at other states that are pushing back against universal vouchers by saying, yeah, maybe this is not a great idea. Unfortunately, it still remains to be, the hill that a lot of these Republicans are going to die on. They wanted universal expansion. That was their top priority, and that continues to be their top priority to this day. So the biggest and best thing we can do is, in LD5, obviously we're a very blue district, but going out and helping the other districts just north of us and around us to flip the legislature so that next year we can start to claw back, and we can start to put in guardrails, and we can start to remove some of the unregulated money. I mean, 600,000 in fraud just on one case that they found involving, I think, 3 people. How much more money is being fraudulently spent that could be used to fund our schools? And even before the universal voucher expansion, it's just been very strategic to not water the garden of our children's minds and our schools by restricting funding in such a harmful way. So very, very passionate about this as a public school parent, and just understanding how strategic and intentional this is. We need to have strategy and leadership when we flip the legislature to go back in, day 1 of session next year with our governor and start to put guardrails in, and not just claw back the funding and put restraints on it, but also then open up more funding, additional funding to school districts everywhere in the state.
Okay, Mr. Lucking, your answer to this viewer's question.
Yeah, so we're a public education family. I went to Central High, my dad, uncle, sister, Madison grade schools, and public education, like I said earlier, is the reason I initially became interested in politics. And it was because I saw what was happening to our systems in Arizona. I have over the past few months, been talking with the superintendents of all of our public school districts in Legislative District 5. I've been visiting them individually and then having conversations with the stakeholders, Save Our Schools, et cetera, who are, active in this space to determine what is the best strategy for day one, next session, when we do flip the legislature. How do we begin rebuilding our public education system in Arizona? And it's, the ESAs, that situation is just one part of, like Rep. Ligori said, an ongoing, sustained strategic attack on our public education system. And it's going to be a big hill to climb to get back to where our public school districts are fully funded, where it's not just a struggle for existence. And so those conversations are being had. Legislation is currently being drafted. Plans are being made, because I think all of us are, cautiously optimistic that we will have an opportunity, as soon as January, to start doing the hard work to actually repair the damage and rebuild the school districts, the public school districts that are so incredibly important to the future of our state.
And Mr. Marquez, let me rephrase the question again, or read the question again for you. What are your plans to support local school boards in the district to fight back against the free fall, as this viewer puts it, of ESA vouchers?
Yeah, I'd say that viewer's absolutely right. It has been a free fall, free for all with these private school vouchers that are draining money from our public schools. Like I said, in Phoenix Union, we've seen this pretty dramatically. I'd point out that because of the universal nature of these vouchers, 60% of the people that have been using the vouchers were already in private schools to begin with. I think something we're going to see in the private school space is tuition inflation. Just like we see with federal financial aid for private universities and public universities. Anytime there's a federal government subsidy for education in this nature, the tuition rises. So if tuition is $15,000 and now there's a government subsidy, it's going to be $23,000. I'd also point out that our Republican superintendent of public instruction, Tom Horn, recently I read an article that he was at an opening of a school with Mike Tyson. So Mike Tyson is opening up a school in Arizona, and there's no accountability for academic standards or financial accountability to make sure these, whether they're great private schools or sort of, private school sharks that are coming in to take advantage of funding. Representative Ligori, mentioned the case that Attorney General Mays, has filed to go after people creating ghost children to take advantage of the fraud that's possible with things like private school vouchers. And so I think at the end of the day, we're going to agree on repealing the private school vouchers, rolling them back to what they were before. And the most important thing we can do is support candidates like Judy Schwiebert, Karen Gresham, Kelly Butler in our neighbor districts. That is, I'm 41 years old. The Republicans have been in charge at the state legislature pretty much my entire life. It's incredible to have a Democratic governor, but to go on offense and do great and amazing things for our public school districts in Arizona, we're going to need a Democratic majority.
Thank you. Mr. Lucking, let's move on to the next question. Some would say this is education related, others may not, but we have seen intense campus protests across the country, including at Arizona universities. What do you think is an appropriate way to deal with these circumstances? And what would you call on university leaders and government leaders to potentially do about it?
Oh my gosh, such a complex situation that we're dealing with right now. I would say that that our First Amendment rights, especially when we're talking about our public schools and our public universities, I think need to be very carefully protected. I realize that that there is, I'm sure, anti-Semitism, that there's Islamophobia happening, and speech can be violence, and words can be violent, and I'm sure that's happening as well. But what I really want to see is our public universities that have historically been places where free speech has a very high level of protection, be a place where these conversations can happen and where students can, who are young and who are there to learn and be supported, can engage in the conversations about these incredibly painful and complex topics. And so when it comes to the decisions that our public universities are making, I want them to be very careful. And I want them to be mindful of overreacting. I'm not saying that they all are, but I want them to be very mindful of the fact that students need to be supported in these conversations. So that's about what I'll say about that.
Mr. Marquez.
Sorry, coming off mute. I'll just say when I got to Georgetown University in 2005, students at Georgetown were organizing a divestment campaign in response to the genocide in Darfur. At the same time, the Republicans in the U.S. Congress were proposing very anti-immigration laws, and there was a lot of protesting that happens when you go to school in Washington, D.C. And I started out as a student protester. I think, as Mr. Lucking has stated, we have to make sure that free speech is protected, and I think it's super important that we also remind the students and everybody that feels passionate about everything that's being protested in our country right now, and our support or lack of support for different things in terms of foreign policy, that protesting has to remain peaceful. I think that's the one of the things that makes our democracy great, is that we believe in this freedom to assembly. We can believe in that freedom of assembly to challenge our government, and I think you see students using that freedom of assembly to challenge the institutions where they pay tuition, and I think that is just an incredible thing that you don't see in places around the world where I've deployed to defend our country. And I would continue to support students in their protesting, but also make sure there's strong protocols in place, both on the student organizer side of things and the universities, to make sure the students remain peaceful in their protest.
Ms. Liguori, what are your thoughts on that?
Very, very timely. I've had a lot of conversations over the past 5 or 6 days with students at ASU, with public safety officers that have been on campus there. I even knocked on the door of a gentleman whose son, they're a Jewish family, whose son goes to Columbia, and had a very long conversation with him. I think that we're dealing with tragedy and death and a long history of trauma all over the Middle East, but very acute in the region right now in Palestine and Israel. And there is, no easy answer for this. But what we're seeing right now is, I think, just the passion. And as one journalist I read in an article today wrote, like, the conscience of our nation is speaking through our kids right now, on both sides. There's been protests that I've heard have been peaceful, that have been disrupted violently. There have been protests that have been, violent, that they've been able to peacefully disband. We never want to see anyone get hurt. We value the voice of all of those that are protesting, especially, for the humanity of the lives and the tragedy happening over there. And we know that our nation has gone through this many times. It seems to be very reminiscent right now of the Vietnam War protest. But I think that we need to remember, at the heart of this, we are not against each other in this country. I would hope that we could listen and respectfully listen to each other and continue to value the conversation and the perspectives on both sides, so that we can move through this in a way where, humanity is leading. And even though we might not have control over what Saudi Arabia and Prime Minister Netanyahu are debating with President Biden over there, can we create spaces even internally with students on either side of this, so that their voices can be heard and valued, but in a way that free speech reigns, but there is not violence or harm committed to the public. And so I think we're just going to continue to see over the next few weeks how this continues to develop.
Thank you. We only have about 10 minutes left until closing statements. So I'm going to go to another viewer question. And Mr. Marquez, this one goes to you first. What are your plans to pick up the voice of person watching, common sense gun safety laws that Representative Longden was championing before she resigned?
Yeah, I love this question. I don't love the issue. Gun violence is very real in our communities. Representative Longden obviously has an incredible personal story of tragedy that turned her into such a huge advocate for gun safety across our state. And this goes back to not having a reasonable conservative party in our country right now that's willing to listen to the majority of Arizonans, and the majority of Arizonans. I've been lucky to probably for the last 5 years work with Everytown for Gun Safety and Moms Demand Action on their National Veterans Advisory Council. And the way we talk about it is training, safety, accountability. When you go to basic training, you get a background check. When you go to basic training, you spend about 10 weeks only learning about weapons safety. And if you don't take that seriously, you have a pretty serious drill sergeant in your face, making sure you start taking it seriously. So we have zero requirements for concealed weapons permits in Arizona, no training at all. So training is important. And then accountability. Simple thing of accountability is if you have a child in your house, you should have a gun safe and a gun lock. Everybody should have a gun safe and a gun lock if you're going to be a weapon owner. And those are three thof training, safety, accountability. How do we make people follow the same common sense practices that the military already expects of all of the service members on active duty, and apply those to civilian laws and expect the same thing from our civilians? If it's good enough for any of us that have served in the military to follow those same tenets of military gun safety culture, it should be good enough for our civilian laws.
Ms. Liguori, what would you do as far as gun safety laws are concerned at the state legislature?
Very important question. And I think that what we're seeing right now is the majority party in control is not representing the majority's interest on this. I think the majority of Arizonans and the majority of the country would like to see a number of very easy, common sense gun laws. A couple of those Mr. Marquez just touched on, to keep people safe, to keep children safe. I talk about it's not fun to admit, but when I toured my son's kindergarten, it was like the third thing on my mind after meeting the teacher is like, how safe and secure is this campus? Like, do they lock this gate? Like, are the doors locked from the inside? And as a parent, that shouldn't be something you're thinking through as you're spending that like very exciting day in your child's like first classroom for the rest of their educational life. But it's a reality in this country, and it's unnecessary. We shouldn't be a country that has the highest amount of gun violence deaths, and that gun violence is the leading cause of death in children under 18. It's just unnecessary. And so I'm hoping that we can continue to fight, arm in arm, with staunch advocates like Charles and Aaron and all the members of our caucus to push back and continue to step up and say, we need common sense laws. And once we have the majority, I know that we'll be able to initiate those with the help of our governor to protect children and to protect the safety of all citizens, so that needless deaths don't have to occur in our country or our state anymore.
Thank you. Mr. Lucking.
Yeah, so one of the many tragic aspects of gun violence is that it's preventable. And these common sense gun laws like Christian's Law and the red flag laws requiring background checks for all gun sales. These are laws that are supported across the political spectrum by gun owners, as well as those who don't own guns. And they're laws that make a significant impact. And the reason we haven't passed them is because there's like no political will on the other side of the aisle to go up against the gun lobby. I'm sure some of the viewers tonight heard Jen Longden's interview about this topic on NPR a few weeks ago. I'm privileged to consider her a good friend and mentor, and she'd been carrying these bills during her time in the House. When I got this gig, the very first stakeholder meeting I had was a sit down with Moms Demand Action. They let me know they didn't have any legislators lined up to carry these bills. And I immediately stepped up and said I would. The caveat being they didn't want a single legislator to carry them. So I'm talking to some of the other ones to kind of divvy them up. Yeah, so these bills are going to continue to be pushed. We've got we've got smart people who are ready to continue to push them, whether or not we flip the ledge next year. I'll also add, along with what Sarah said, all of us on here tonight have little kids. We all have, understood that we're living in a truly horrifying timeline in which school shootings happen, and the current power structures are preventing these common sense laws from going through. And, I don't think any of us will stand for that. And I certainly will not accept the status quo in that situation either.
Thank you so much. Last topic we'll have time for is the broad view of housing. And I want to start with Ms. Liguori on this one. The housing crisis in Arizona presents complex challenges. And so I'd like to know how much you think, and as specific as you can be, how much do you think state government can do to address affordable housing and also address growing homelessness in the area? I know that's a lot to pack into 2 minutes, but please do the best you can. Thanks.
And please give me the signal when need be too. I think that state government can play a big role in this. I think that local government can play a big role in this as well. I got very concerned 3 to 4 years ago, kind of seeing, what I'll call the iceberg of this affordable housing crisis that we were slowly moving towards. And I feel like right now it's in front of us, where you go to any place in our entire state, and the number one thing that they'll talk to you about most likely is, I can't afford my rent. I can't afford a place to buy. I'm very constrained right now. My income, most of it is going to paying for housing, where upwards of 60% are rent burden in our state right now. So I think that the state has a huge role to play, not just in the shaping of policy, whether that be zoning reform or incentivizing more diverse types of housing, more diverse affordable housing. We've seen a number of those policies come through the legislature this year, of which I support. But I think there's also the funding side that the government needs to make sure that we're keeping an eye on. Things like our Department of Housing have done a great job, but the Finance Authority has been not utilized in a way that I think it could be and should be, but is now going to be under this new administration, where we can pull down more federal dollars. Like I mentioned earlier in the call, with ARPA dollars driving up, with the state budget, the city budget's drying up, we need to look for additional streams of funding. I think that through the Finance Authority, through the Commerce Authority, and through programs like LIHTC and others, the state can really get creative, not just in the solutions we bring forward in the physical structures of housing and how they're built and the ease of bringing new housing online, but can we go and leverage money in a way that we haven't before to draw down more federal dollars to support things like the Department of Housing and home ownership programs and mortgage buy down programs. I think that we've underutilized that, and that's where I have kind of my eye on the next 6 months of where do we find more money, more funding streams in ways that can add to this problem. But I think even just through policy, the state government can play a very important role, not in conjunction with our local governments as well. And so I've been very happy that even though this problem is of massive magnitude and statewide, that it's become front and center in everyone's lives, and everyone is really moving forward on the solution front to action at this point.
Mr. Lucking, I don't want to rephrase the question. Obviously, I'll ask for your ideas for this, but the homelessness crisis in particular is one that many leaders, city and state leaders, and across the country, this is not something that started being discussed a year or two ago. So there are some voters who might be skeptical or cynical about how do we deal with homelessness, but also, again, lack of affordable housing, which is affecting so many people in our community. Are there new ideas, or are there ideas that just need to be implemented better to help solve these problems?
Well, thank you. Such a complex question, and it's all of the above. This is a problem that affects everyone at every level of society in Arizona right now. And like Rep. Ligori, I kind of saw this coming down the pike a couple years ago. That's, I shifted in my career into serving as a eviction defense attorney. Because I started reading about the absolutely skyrocketing eviction rates that were happening in Arizona. And eviction's one small part of it, but this is an issue that affects retirees who have been on a fixed income for 20 years. This is an issue that affects 30-year-olds that want to buy their first house. There's an issue that affects 18-year-olds that are out on their own for the first time. And it's tragic in many respects, and it's not a problem that has a single solution. And so, like Rep. Ligori said, it will require different levels of government getting really creative with different approaches to funding and with different ideas about policies that can increase the supply of housing. I mean, supply is something that can be affected through things like zoning. And so, there are a lot of creative solutions at the city level. There's a lot of, creative solutions that have come before us that we've put together in the legislature. But it's not a single solution, and it's not something that's just contingent upon the state level or the city level. And the federal government, there's dollars available there too. So it's going to require a large concerted effort on the part of our cities, our state, our local communities, and the federal government as well. And so it's not an easy question, but it's going to be something that we have to get really creative and push really hard for.
Thank you. Mr. Marquez, you have the last word on this particular topic.
Yeah.
Go ahead, sir.
I'd say, one of the most successful housing programs in the history of our country is the Veterans Administration Home Loan, zero down home loan. And I think we need an all-of-government approach from school districts, cities, and state and federal government to figure out how do we offer something similar for public service employees in the state of Arizona. We have teachers that work in Phoenix Union that drive all the way from Maricopa because they can't afford to live in Phoenix Union. So if you're a firefighter, a teacher, police officer, if you have a job with the state government here in Arizona, we should figure out how to develop something similar so that more people can afford to buy a home in Arizona. I'll say this issue, like all issues here in Arizona, go back to the Republican majority in the state legislature. I know there was a proposal that the Republicans proposed this legislative session that wanted to criminalize homelessness. They wanted to criminalize homelessness and criminalize the people that run homeless shelters. And the point was, if you're in a homeless shelter, they wanted them to be drug-free. And if they weren't drug-free, they were going to charge the people that run the homeless shelters with crimes, with misdemeanors. And so I think we absolutely need housing first policies to make sure we have the most compassionate way of helping people that are in that most desperate time of their lives. We need to look at things like workforce housing. I know the Phoenix Industrial Development Authority is working with a school district here in Phoenix to develop some workforce housing. So that's all a government approach, and hopefully that's a model to be replicated across the state. And I think I'm lucky to live in one of LD5's historic neighborhoods in the Willow neighborhood, but I'll go back and say there's no way I could afford to live in this neighborhood without the Veterans Administration Home Loan. And I think we got to be careful between now and November about cutting too many deals with the Republicans, because I think we want to make sure that anything we do around housing is making sure we're requiring affordability and mixed in requirements in that. And we can't, got to be careful with things like short-term rentals as well. So.
Thanks to all of you. Before we go to the closing statement, I just wanted to thank all of you for just being nice, civil people, which is appreciated. But also, these are very complex topics, and we all know that debates do our best, but answering some of these in 2 minutes is hard. So thank you all for giving it the old college try. So with that, we go to our closing statements. Ms. Ligori, please, 60 seconds.
Okay, and I'll preface that by saying that someone is texting me asking if I can ask a question, but I don't think I'm in a position for that. So let me go to my closing statements and I'll answer this one offline. But thank you again for everyone tuning in today, and thank you, Mr. Goldstein, for running a debate. I really I think that this is cordial because, to be honest, the three of us are peers and friends outside of this. So this is not a competitive, it is competitive in the sense that we're both competing for 2 seats, but I admire and respect, the gentleman here tonight. And what I love most about this district, LD5, is the diversity that we have, from Melrose to the historic neighborhoods to North Central. We've got so many wonderful local businesses and people that add to the richness, and I'm just very grateful to call it my home. I believe that my professional experience in finance and real estate allows me to bring a unique perspective to my work at the legislature, especially in light of the housing, budget, and water crisis that we face. And I know that my steadfast values to building up the lives of people in our community continue to be the place that I lead from and will always lead from. How I view the role as a state representative is being committed to using policy as a tool to help improve people's lives, to use it in ways to remove barriers that impede from people thriving, not just simply surviving in our state. And I am very passionate pushing back against discrimination in every form, and to proudly support that anyone is allowed to love who they want to love, be in charge of their own body, and make the decisions that they want. So I hope to continue the fight as our state approaches this tipping point and be a part of a caucus that is able to shift from defense to offense and from battling regressive policies to progressive ones. I've been a PC for going on 8 years now. In and outside of this election, I won't go anywhere. I'm still committed to the democratic values and the fights and the causes I believe in. But with your vote and support, I hope to go back to the legislature to continue to build upon the work that we're all so proud to do down there. So thank you once again.
Thank you. Mr. Lucking, your closing statement, please.
Thank you so much. It has been my great honor and privilege to serve alongside Representative Liguori and Senator Alston as a member of the remarkable team that make up our Democratic caucus this year. Even in the face of deepening divisiveness and a majority made up of extremists, we've been able to accomplish some truly historic successes. We've taken decisive and bold steps to make our beloved state a safer, more functional, and more accessible place to call home. We've successfully blocked the ongoing attacks on our First Amendment protections, culturally diverse community, our voting rights, and our public education system, and the ongoing attacks on our LGBTQ friends and family. There is obviously an enormous amount left to do. With your support, you'll see a continued fight to reverse our housing emergency, a restructuring of our outdated eviction systems, and a reversal of the decades-long attack on our public schools. My name's Charles Lucking. I'm your state rep, and I humbly ask for your votes so that we can continue to do the work and make the moves that will make Arizona the beautiful place that we know and love. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Lucking, thank you. And Mr. Marquez, your closing statement, please.
Yeah, I want to thank everybody at home watching. I want to thank my fellow candidates again, and you, Mr. Goldstein. I supported Charles when he ran for the Phoenix Union Governing Board. I've been lucky to campaign not just once, but 2 cycles alongside Sarah Liguori. District 5 is very fortunate to have incredible people willing to step up to run. We're running in the Democratic primary, and I think we're all on the same team. And I like to use the acknowledgement that, it's kind of like a football team. Some of us are trying out for quarterback or a different position, but really the truth is in District 5, Senator Leila Alston is our quarterback. And so in this race, I think we're trying out to maybe be a running back or a blocker who can do some tackling to make sure we can move the Democratic Party forward as much as possible between now and November. I've been doing this for 20 years, starting out as a field organizer, working as political director for Terry Goddard, working as Veterans Outreach Representative for Ruben Gallego. I was the vice chair of the state party from 2014 to 2016 before I went back to Afghanistan. And I'll just say, this election matters a lot in LD5, but what matters most in LD5 is what happens after July 30th. I really believe it's not hyperbole to say that the future of our democracy is dependent on making sure we defeat Donald Trump in November, and that we do not have an authoritarian in the White House. And so candidates and elected officials become the infrastructure to turn out the vote. We have to increase the Democratic vote in District 5. We have to support our swing district candidates across the state to really make sure we flip the state legislature. And I'll go back to talking about Donald Trump. I mentioned earlier I was in Afghanistan. I was in Kandahar the night that he was elected. And during that time in Afghanistan, I saw our rules of engagement become more aggressive. I saw people challenge things like the Geneva Convention. I saw our international coalition partners decide they didn't want to work with us anymore. And what we've seen in 4 years with him as president is the conditions that we're living today, where a law from the Civil War era to strip away rights for women, abortion rights, went into effect and is still in effect for at least 90 days after this legislative session ends. So this November, this July 30th, I hope voters will think about the three of us are great candidates, and I think we'd be lucky with any of us in terms of how we're going to vote in the legislature. And I think what I challenge my fellow candidates to think about is what are you going to do from July 30th to November to make sure we defeat Donald Trump, defeat Kari Lake, and pass the abortion rights ballot initiative here in Arizona. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Marquez. Thank you so much. That concludes our debate. Thank you to Sarah Ligori, Charles Lucking, Aaron Marquez. I very much appreciate you taking part tonight. To voters, I want to thank all of you who took the time to watch the debate and inform yourselves before the July 30th primary election. We encourage you to visit azcleanelections.gov. That's azcleanelections.gov for official, accurate voting information. I'm Steve Goldstein.